Showed up early. Good evening. It's good to see everyone out. We got, man, we're low tonight, but I know Chris and Ginger are kind of under the weather, so Ginger did get to come home. So I saw Chris today when I was putting the banner out for Trunk or Treat, and he was headed to the doctor to get some medication. So anyway, but it's good to see y'all, and I hope you're having a good week. Anyone that we need to put on the prayer list? Anyone?
Well, not for the prayer list, but you go tomorrow to your neurology appointment for a follow-up. And we're expecting to get nothing but the best news there.
Hopefully so.
Right hand around here, I'll spill it.
Keep Chris and Debbie and Pablo in your prayers.
Right.
Remember Chris, Debbie, and Pablo.
I want to keep Lurley Hopkins on there too. She's some better,
Okay.
but she's 80, 81.
Hmm.
No, she's 83.
We've got Judy Williams' family on our prayer list, Jane Adams, and Alexis Moody. So keep all these folks on your prayers, or in your prayers. Anyone else that we need to put on the prayer list tonight? This weekend we've got the pumpkin patch trip, so remember that. I think there's 30-something people signed up to go, so be in prayer for that. Just be in prayer for those that are participating in our Christmas music. It's going to be challenging, but I think we can do it. So we've only had one practice, and that was kind of a listen to. So remember that. We're going to be doing that on December the 11th in the morning service. So remember that. Leslie and I had the privilege of going to the Gideon's Pastor Appreciation Supper on Monday night. So keep the Gideons in your prayers as they continue to do the wonderful work that they do. Again, just, keep our church in your prayers. There's a lot of people on our prayer list that we need to remember and pray for. Noah, the last report I heard was he seemed to be doing some better, even though, as far as his appetite goes, it came back.
Tuesday, and they sent him back home because his platelets were low.
Platelets, yes, that's what I was thinking. The platelets were low.
Next Tuesday, and they're just letting his body
Recover.
back up,
Yeah.
I think.
And sometimes it doesn't recover as quickly as they'd like for it to be able to do that again. So, it's just, it's hard on the body. It's hard on the loved ones to watch their loved one go through that. So again, just keep Noah and family in your prayers as that continues on. But again, it is a praise report when you see how much it's shrunk.
Yeah.
And hard to believe it was that big.
Yeah.
So again, we do praise God for that. Anyone else? Anyone? Again, I'm glad to be here. I've been dealing with sinus stuff today. It's just changing weather, I guess. I don't know, but mercy. But anyway, I was going to go see Miss Margie today, but I didn't feel great, so I thought, that'd be kind of foolish to go visit somebody if you're not feeling good. I felt like I was okay, and it was just sinus, but you never know. So anyway, I know I heard on the Weather Channel app or something where the flu is coming, and it's going to be early this year. So it's not one thing, it's another, but yeah.
Well, it's just
So
more after.
it's just, and flu is normal
Yeah.
this time of year. Usually it's January or so when it really shows its ugly head a bunch, but It may be earlier this year, so anyway, just remember
What was it recently, had type A and type B flu?
Anthony.
Yeah, yeah. It was rough.
And do keep Tara in your prayers as she's dealing with several things. And anyway, the time is drawing closer as they have told her that very likely Thanksgiving week. So instead of waiting till December. So not much early, but maybe a little bit. Maybe she can get some relief soon. So
Amanda's right behind her, 1 week.
yeah.
So,
So keep those two in your prayers if you would. All right, anyone else? Anyone? It's good to see everyone watching tonight. Thank you so much for being on here, and I hope you are having a good week. Did you enjoy the Arctic weather this morning, man? It was cold. Whew. It was cold all day until, mid-afternoon. Then it warmed up a little bit. But,
I
man.
went out and walked my 2 miles today, this afternoon. I waited till afternoon and it was a little chilly.
A little nippy.
I walked.
And that wind didn't help any. So anyway, but I think we got a little warming trend come, and maybe a little bit more rain. So we need some more. We need some more dust settled. So anyway, let's pray. Father, we thank you so much for this day. We thank you for your love and care for these that are here. We just pray that your will is done in these lives. And God, we just continue to pray for all those on our prayer list. And you know the needs out there and just the desires of our hearts. And so, God, we know that you are ultimately in control. And so we pray, Lord, that we will just believe in you, have faith in you, and know that you are going to do what you consider best for us. So God, just help us to continue to be very faithful to you and strive to become more like your son Jesus, who had such a tremendous burden and continues to have for the lost, no matter what walk of life they were in or are in now, that he died for all on the cross, and therefore we need to be very diligent about sharing the gospel with others. Thank you again for just allowing us to be here tonight. Continue to bless, Lord, and just be with us as we just learn from your word. We love you and praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. Tonight we're in 2 Samuel chapters 5 and 6. And so again, we are progressing as far as David and becoming the king of Israel. And so anyway, so I will open up the floor. First of all, what was your memory verse for the week?
2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 10. And he became more and more powerful because the Lord God Almighty was with him.
No, I think I did the same one.
Copycat.
I didn't copy you. I don't know what you do. I'm in the living room. You're in your
Opposite
office.
sides of the
We're
house.
on the other end, opposite ends of the house. So, but that does remind us where, David, where his success came from. Anyone else?
Chapter 5, verse 24. When you hear the sound of marching in the tops of the balsam trees, then rouse yourself. For then the Lord has gone out before you to strike down the army of the Philistines. I love it when he does things.
Where you see and hear him working. That's
Yeah,
what you're supposed
yeah.
to pass that down. Really.
Anyone else? He was busy. He was drinking his coffee. Man,
I'm old and
Thank
slow.
you.
don't interrupt the man when he's drinking his coffee.
I ain't interrupting. Somebody's talking to you.
So I mean, when we look at these chapters, there are some wonderful things about them. So, anybody have a question, a verse, anything about chapters 5 and 6?
I found it interesting that they wouldn't let David go into Jerusalem, so he just went to Zion and just, that's where he built his house, set up residence, right? Is it-
No, he actually went to Jerusalem.
Did he finally go back in?
Yeah, he went from after he became king. He actually, it says in verse 6 of chapter 5, and the king and his men went to Jerusalem against the Jebusites. So if you go back to the days of Joshua, where the nation of Israel was conquering land and getting their allotment, Jerusalem was one of the places that they did not conquer. This was a place that God wanted them to conquer, but because of their lack of faith, they did not. So really you've got, the nation of Israel.
I think that
And-
the confusion is Zion is like
Yeah.
within
Yeah.
Jerusalem.
Well, that's was what.
Well, there's two, you got to remember foreign languages and different people reporting and different translations. You will find different names for the same thing. So Zion is another name for Jerusalem, I believe. It's also a mountain.
No.
So,
My-
and that's the thing, is Jerusalem was up.
Footnote says, Jerusalem was called lots of different things, but it was David that gave the city the name Jerusalem. It's referred to as the city of David, and he built a palace in the highest section of the city that is frequently referred to as Mount Zion.
So, so David, I mean, why was Jerusalem key? Why would David waste his time? I mean, he had all this other, he had the Philistines still occupying land and all this. Why spend the time to try to gain one city?
Because of its position.
It was on the hill, wasn't it?
It was on a hill, and it was pretty centrally located in the land of Canaan. And so, up to that time, there really wasn't a palace, a capital city. And so David brought this in. Now, again, what that was going to do was going to centralize the government. It was going to bring and unite the Israelites together, and it was going to allow to unite their religion, and that's part of what David's assignment was supposed to do. So when we look at the overtaking of Jerusalem, why is it, as you read, the Jebusites were pretty confident that they were in a stronghold and they could not be defeated. So why is that? Well, when you're up on a hill above everything else, it's kind of hard to sneak up on you, isn't it? And I don't know for sure. I'm just saying this off top. It may have been a fortified. A lot of the cities had walls around them even back then, because Jericho, the first city they went, had a wall around it. So, if you have a walled city on top of a hill, I mean, it's kind of hard to overcome that. And so, just like many years later, the Babylonians believed that Babylon was impenetrable. And, just like this city, it had to do with a waterway, didn't it? I mean, if you can cut a lot of things off from people, but water is something you can't cut off from them and them survive, particularly if there's a siege. And so many believe that David used a waterway because there was a canal that went into the city that if they were under siege, they could still have water.
If Jerusalem was on a hill, how did water run?
I don't know that. I'm not privileged to that information.
Physics. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you think about it, though, and of course it was many years later, but in Babylon, the king of Babylon lived high up on a hill, and he up on the very top of the castle or the palace, there was a garden up there.
One of the 7
And
wonders
they
of the world.
watered, yes, one of the old, the old world, 7 wonders of the world. And back, I don't remember how long ago, but it's been a while, there was a man that offered much money, I mean $1 million plus, to anyone that could figure it out how the Babylonians, how they got the water from the Euphrates River up to the top to water the plants up there. And so, I don't know, but even back then, their engineering skills were pretty amazing without having a lot of technology. So, the Jebusites kind of made fun of David, and it says the king and his men. So I don't know if this is because the very beginning of chapter 5 is where we see the people gathering to make David king. Now, if you go over into 1 Chronicles chapter 12, I think starting with verse 23, you will find that the initial gathering was, the soldiers from Israel and different people, mainly soldiers, gathered to celebrate David becoming king. And there was over, I believe, 340,000 of them. So, I mean, this was a big gathering, even though in 2 Samuel we were not given that, but in 1 Chronicles we are. So, very much celebrated, and the Jebusites didn't think David and his men. So I don't know if this is David and his 600 men that he, became an outlaw with, or if there were more of the soldiers of Israel. I don't know. But David invaded, he kicked them out, and Jerusalem became the capital city. Now, apparently, David's fame spread pretty quickly because it says, and Hiram, the king of Tyre, sent messengers to David and cedar trees, also carpenters and masons who built David a house. Now, commentary says that cedar trees were a very expensive wood back then. So David didn't just build him a little old shack. David lived in a very, very fancy, nice, palatial home made of cedar. And so he had the respect of foreign kings that were on the outskirts of the promised land.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Recognized him as a power.
But then at the end of chapter 5, you kind of see where David's demise is kind of foretold, right? Because why? Because starting with verse 13 of chapter 5, it says, somebody read that.
David took him more concubines and wives out of Jerusalem after he was come from Hebron, and there were yet sons and daughters born to David.
And then it lists them all. And that's one thing that Deuteronomy, in God setting up the rules and regulations for a king, one of them was you're not to take many wives, particularly foreign wives, because it says they will turn you away from worshiping me. And that's exactly what we see. In fact, most of David's problems came from either one of his wives or his children that came from those wives. So, I mean, when the more wives he had, the more troubles he kind of piled up on himself. And the more kids he had. So, he didn't know what he was doing at the time, but again, it's a sad thing. So, we see here that David is a warrior, right? I mean, Sunday I'm preaching out of chapter 7, and we're going to talk about that some, but David was a warrior. And so when the Philistines, now it makes me wonder, and it has to be, that some of these Philistines are the same ones that David ran with when he was living among the Philistines, right? So here suddenly David becomes king of Israel, and so you got to imagine these Philistines, after hearing the news, said, well, we're not going to put up with that. And so the Philistine army gathers, and David goes, and you know, what is different about David when it came to battles than Saul?
He asked the Lord, that's what he wanted him to do.
Absolutely. I mean, again, when David returned to God, he returned all the way, right? And so before going out to his first battle that we read about here, he inquires of the Lord, and he said, well, shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand? So David is not even saying, you know, should I go fight against them and I'm going to win this battle? He's leaving it all up to God, right? He's saying, are you going to win this battle? Will you give them into my hand? And so, and of course, God answers him and says, go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand. And of course, David went up, and it was a major blowout, as we say today. You know, it was a rout. There was no questions about it. And so we see that there was another battle that takes place towards the end of this chapter, and some of it Miss Linda has already read. But David, instead of, you know, oftentimes when we win a battle and there's another one behind it with the same people, we think, well, we won the first one, we can win the second one, right? Like Joshua did with Ai. You know, it's a small, we only need 3,000 men, well, surely we can beat them with no problem. Didn't bother talking to God about it. He just figured, hey, we're going to win it.
This.
David inquired of the Lord, and God told him, he said, you know, don't hit them head on. He said, go up, you shall not go up, go around to their rear and come against them opposite the balsam tree. Now there's, in another translation, they're called the mulberry trees. And so, you know, there is belief out there that when they hear, it says the marching, and that's the angels who are there. And when you hear that, these angels are leading them into battle. You know, they're marching up in the treetops. And so it's kind of a neat idea, but it just goes to show you that, you know, God sometimes does give us visible signs that he's there, but sometimes he doesn't. And the thing that we need to understand is that if we have faith in God and we follow his lead, then he's always going to take care of business. And since David followed his lead, God destroyed him again. And so David defeated, you know, one of the biggest enemies of Israel that they had, that was constantly a thorn in their side. I mean, you remember through Joshua and Judges, I mean, the Philistines were the main enemy. Yeah, there was the Amalekites and the Armenians and Arameans and all those other people, but the Philistines was the major one because they had conquered and lived on the shoreline, and that's where they held on to. They had modern equipment that they got from the Greeks. So they had iron swords and they had chariots and that kind of thing. And so they were a formidable foe when it came to being an enemy. But of course we know that no matter how much armament they have, God can bypass that in a major way, just like he did that stone that hit Goliath right in the forehead. So, you know, chapter 5 is pretty exciting, and it shows us, you know, where God wanted David. You know, God wanted David to bring Israel together and unite them by defeating the enemies around and capturing what then became the capital city. But and you know, when the people came to David and said, you know, we want you to be our king, you know, they gave 3 reasons as I spoke of last Sunday. One of them was he was one of them. You know, he was an Israelite. One of them was that they already knew his leadership skills because they'd already seen it when he was general and even in the battle with Goliath. But also because the Lord had said, you shall be shepherd of my people Israel, and you shall be prince over Israel. So when you look at David's task for being over Israel as king, I kind of boiled it down to two things: lead and feed. Isn't that the job of a shepherd? I mean, lead and feed. Now, in the leadership part, there's a lot of different aspects to it, right? But the feed part is to, and that's where God wanted David to unite the nation of Israel as God's nation once again and be a God-fearing nation. Before they had kind of been divided there. So, again, God used David in a major way. So, are there any questions or comments on chapter 5? I mean, can you imagine if somebody made a movie of chapter 5? That'd be pretty exciting. Just out of 1st and 2nd Samuel, it'd be a pretty exciting movie, wouldn't it? I mean, there's a lot of action there. And in fact, in a lot of the Old Testament, there's a lot of action. Until you get to the Chronicles where they had all the begotten and they couldn't make a movie out of that.
Yes.
But anyway.
Lots of bloodshed and
Yeah.
cutting heads off.
Yeah. Yep.
We were talking about how Jerusalem and how important it was. I heard on the news this morning, Benjamin Netanyahu, he's running for prime minister again. He also has a book out, so they've been interviewing him a lot on TV. But anyway, he made the statement this morning in his interview that Australia has just made a declaration that Jerusalem is no longer like the capital or leader of Israel. It's like they're non-existent anymore, and it's like.
Well, how does
Why?
Australia?
Yeah.
How do they have a right to do that?
What's the deal, and what has Jerusalem done to you that it's like,
Like they don't recognize it anymore.
yeah, that just doesn't, and it's like, and I know a lot of strange stuff is going on, and my grandmother always used to tell me, make sure that you pay attention to the Middle East.
Yeah.
And
Oh, yeah.
That she always said that if America ever turned their back on Israel and, didn't defend them, didn't help defend them, or didn't help protect them, that would be the end of us. But I can't help but wonder, what in the world would be, what's behind that?
I don't know.
What purpose, what benefit would that be to them? What?
I don't even know why Australia is getting involved.
Yeah, with
I don't know.
oh,
That's weird.
it had something, I think I do remember them saying now, it had something to do with Ukraine and all of the refugees that are coming out of Ukraine, and that some of the Jewish people from the Ukrainian, area were being pushed into Australia or something. I don't know. It's just, but I was like, that is the most illogical, stupid thing I've ever heard. It's just like,
That's why I don't watch the news.
yeah.
I guess, and I guess we can say as God works in mysterious ways, so does Satan.
Oh yeah.
And to attack the Israelites and even Jerusalem is, a major deal. Just like in the United States, he's attacking families now. So, maybe that had something to do with it. I don't know. But yeah, so it's, the Middle East has always been a major deal, and it affects us in a major way, particularly as Christians. I mean, most Americans who are not a Christian, they don't understand the importance of the Middle East and why our relationship with them makes a difference to our country, But one of these days they're going to find that out. Because...
I always found it odd that the Israelis, even though the majority of them are not Jewish, a lot of them are not Jewish, they're from some other, like Netanyahu is Lithuanian or something, I think, by birth, but he adopted Israel. His parents and him adopted Israel as their country, and, you know, that's where they wanted their home to be. And, you know, so you just, they know so much more about biblical things, you know what I mean, than most.
Well,
people.
yeah, I mean,
You know, it's just amazing how, even though they don't consider themselves Christians, the majority of them don't consider themselves.
But being a Jew in that culture, a lot of the stuff in the Bible means so much more to them than it does to us, who really don't understand the culture
Right.
and their ways and their thought process of going through some of the things they go in their beliefs. So, yeah, I mean, you know, being a Jew is definitely a plus when it comes to understanding biblical truths, because, you know, I've heard pastors say, you know, trip to Jerusalem, it just totally changed the way that they looked at the Bible. When you read about these different places and different things going on, you know, it just kind of opened their eyes in a whole new way. So, yeah, I mean, we really have to be careful with that, because, again, God has not changed the fact of Israel's importance to the world. You know, it's just, since He made them a people, a nation, it's not going to end until, you know, the Lord comes back. So we just need to always pray that our leaders don't, you know, go blind and decide
Go
that,
back on,
yeah, because we've been close a few times where some of our dignitaries have said, well, we don't really, you know, Trump was one that, boy, he promoted, you know, befriending Israel in a major way. I mean,
And all the rest of them kept
Yeah,
saying,
yeah.
oh, we need a two-state.
yeah,
You know, and this is political, but Jimmy Carter, he was the Southern Baptist, you know,
Yeah.
and even he was not, you know, basically turned his back on Israel, you know, when at a very critical time,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm like, dude,
he was, may have just been Southern Baptist by name, though,
that's true.
you know, you never
I
know.
mean, you know, I mean, just no more than I know about it. I've always heard, you know, God's
Yeah.
gonna protect Israel, and we have to, you know, and I think to myself, I'd be terrified,
To not ally yourself.
exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and you know, none of us who have not been in politics can even imagine what it's like in Washington, D.C. I mean, it's just,
Dirty,
it's just,
apparently.
yeah, I mean, politics on that level is, you know, it's just a whole, and I have no desire to get involved with it, just no way. So, chapter 6. There's really some interesting reading in chapter 6, you know. It just,
That poor guy that tried to reach out and catch the ark.
well, you know, here are just in the beginning of it, all right? It said, David again gathered all the chosen men of Israel, 30,000. David rose and went with all the people who were with him from Baal Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which had been there for a long time, which is called by the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned on the cherubim. And they carried the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab,
That was the first problem.
which was on the hill, and Uzzah and Ahio, or Ahiah, however you want to say that, the sons of Abinadab were driving the new cart with the ark of God, and Ahiah went before the ark. So Uzzah and Ahiah, their names mean strength and friendly. So you have strength and friendly leading the way. But the first problem is that even though David was doing a good thing, he did it in the wrong way. The Ark of the Covenant was never supposed to ride on a cart. Now, you know, one writer that I read kind of paralleled this with today. You know, well, you know, the Israelites or David may have thought, well, we got this brand new card, fancy card, and we're going to honor God by putting, you know, this Ark of the Covenant on it, and you know, this is going to be better. And oftentimes today, you know, we try to put fancy things connected with our worship with God and think that it is more honorable than it, you know, just doing it the way it needs to be done. And again, you know, they really did not honor God by putting the Ark of the Covenant on this new cart.
Evidently, the priests weren't doing their job right.
Somebody wouldn't do it. Well, you know, with Saul as king, religion and the worship of God was not promoted. You know, so Israel got lax, just like we see America today. You know, Americans have got lax in their worship to God and their commitment to Him. Everything else comes first. And so, you know, so here they are. They have the Ark of the Covenant on a brand new cart with the two people leading it that were not intended to lead it. You know, if I remember right, reading it, those who were the sons of Kohath were supposed to be the ones to carry the ark. And again, the ark was supposed to be carried. It had poles on that went on either side, and you had 4 people, you know, 2 in front, 2 in back, that were supposed to put it up on their shoulders and carry this thing wherever they went. And of course, they didn't do that. And it says, and David and all the house of Israel were celebrating before the Lord with songs and lyres and harps and tambourines and castanets and cymbals. And when they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah put his hand out to the ark of God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. And the anger of the Lord was kindled against Uzzah, and God struck him down there because of his error, and he died there beside the ark of God. Now I'm going to tell you something. A lot of people probably have a problem with that, because it seems that he was trying to do something good, right?
Yeah, you probably read the same thing I did too, with this Uzzah and Ahio. The ark had been in their home, or they'd been in the presence of the ark for a long time. It had been there. And you know, when you have something valuable and you have it for a long time and it becomes something you see every day, it sort of loses its value. You know, maybe he didn't have the right, didn't keep the right awe and respect of the presence of God.
Well, and that's the thing. Even David made the mistake of the way that he did this. I mean, yes, the intent was good. Bring the ark back to Jerusalem and let's unite Israel in God once again, because the Ark of the Covenant was a representation of God among the nation of Israel. Always had been. It was not supposed to be an idol, but it was something to remind Israel that God's presence was with them. And so, you know, they forgot the importance. I mean, one of the reasons that, why do you think God, commanded that when the ark was to be moved, it was to be done on the shoulders of the specific persons named? I mean, worshiping God oftentimes is a struggle. You know, I'm not saying it's a burden, but it's more than just a convenient thing to do. You know, it takes effort. And so carrying the Ark of the Covenant oftentimes would remind them that, you know, God's presence is joyful, is wonderful and all that, but it can also be a burden and cause us to struggle, because it deals with our humanity and our sinfulness. And so, you know, David may have been a little flippant in the way that he did this, you know. He kind of made a big deal out of it, you know, to where it was almost commercialized, kind of like today. You know, there'd have been, you know, people lined on the street and TV cameras and the helicopters going over everything. And that would just kind of took away from, what this should have been. Not that, not that we can't rejoice. Not that we can't worship in a free way. When I was a kid, basically when you came to church, you just sat there and you're supposed to be quiet. You were supposed to be, as the old term is, stoic, which was very, down-faced and everything else. And that's not really what God desires from us. But on the other hand, you've got people that take it too far and they make a show out of it. And so, we really need to be careful with that. And of course, Uzzah, bless his heart, he just did the wrong thing. I mean, when God says don't do it, that's what he means. Whether you intended for the good, what we need to understand is if the Ark of the Covenant was so important, God, if it was going to fall and bust, God could have taken care of that. By the way, the Ark of the Covenant was only a 3-foot long box by 2 feet wide and 2 feet tall. It wasn't very big. It did have the mercy seat, the lid on it where the cherubim was over the mercy seat. But again, it was just an object, And so God, I think through this kind of sent a message, worshiping me is more than just all of these outward acts and, getting this box from one place to another. It takes sacrifice and it takes effort. And so anyway, we know that David had a problem with this, right? It says he got angry with the Lord. And sometimes that's our reaction too, because we're human beings. When things happen, in our initial reaction, we are angry with the Lord. And David didn't really understand. And so when he saw what happened here, he decided, well, if this is going to happen, man, we don't need this in Jerusalem. And so he left it here at Obed-Edom the Gittite. And so, it was there for 3 months, and it said, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household because the Ark of the Covenant was there. And so when David saw this, he said, well, we need to transport it on to Jerusalem, right? And so it says, so David went and brought up the Ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. And when now, you'll see a difference here because it says, and when those who bore the Ark of the Lord.
So we had it done the right
So
way.
they went from the cart to people carrying it. So, I mean, if God didn't do anything else through the life of Uzzah, he got their attention, right? And so,
I don't remember writing this. It was early one morning. Crowds in the ceremony reflect the celebration that accompanied this task. They must have been really proud of their new cart. But worship has nothing to do with the way it makes us feel.
and that's the thing, sometimes people connect a worship service, or whether it's good or not,
To the way it makes them feel.
by the emotional response that it brings.
Not that that's wrong, if it does,
No.
but
I mean, we can't simply go by emotion because emotion is part of us. We can't repress it in our worship, but we also can't let it overrule true worship of God.
Because then it comes by us.
Yeah. And that's it. Some of the hardest messages I've ever preached where, I just got down and I was almost yelling at people. Man, preacher, that was the best message you've ever preached. Do you know why? Because it caused an emotional stirring. And that's not what it's about. Church camp is that way a lot of times. There is an emotional stirring. Now, I'm not saying there's not real decisions being made, but there's also a lot of emotional decisions being made. And an emotional reaction decision made in the spiritual realm will not last. It has to be, again, worship has to be about God. It cannot be about us. Otherwise, it is false worship. And so, it said that when they had gone 6 steps, he sacrificed an ox and a fattened animal. And here's the thing, and David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the horn. Now, is there anything wrong with that? By the way, David was not indecently dressed here.
Yeah.
What is this saying when David wore a linen ephod?
He took on the job of priest.
No,
No, he became like everybody else.
that was a
He kinda-
common.
He kind of
That was a common wear.
Oh,
discarded
was-
his kingly stuff and
yeah.
just became one of the.
He was not wearing
Little
his
crowd.
kingly robes.
oh.
He was not wearing priestly robes. He was just wearing clothes just like everybody else. I mean, and there he was out there showing himself by dancing among the common people. You know, and truly, I mean, when you think about it, that's not bad. Because no human being should elevate themselves above others regardless of their position, right? Especially when it comes to spiritual matters. I mean, David was there in worship of God, and I think he considered bringing the ark back to Jerusalem as an act of worship. And so when the music played, David was moved and he danced to the Lord. Now, you know, in BMA circles that I grew up on, oh my goodness, you'd be excommunicated for doing something like that. You'd be excommunicated for just raising one hand, much less 2.
Especially if it gets above your shoulder.
Yeah, if it gets above here, you're man. So I mean, and of course, David was not putting on a show. This was his spiritual expression, this outward expression of a spiritual happening in his life. So, you know, and he was out there with all of the other people. I believe they were all dancing too, you know. And it says, as the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King Saul leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. She
Because
didn't
he was
understand it.
Being like other people.
Yes, he had lowered him. She
Lowered
considered
himself.
that he had lowered himself. And so it says that, it says, and David returned to bless his household, but David, the daughter of Saul, came out to meet David and said, how the king of Israel honored himself today. Now that is sarcasm right there, by the way. Uncovering, so there is sarcasm in the Bible. Uncovering himself before the eyes of his servants, female servants, as one of the vulgar fellows shamelessly uncovers himself. And David said to Michal, it was before the Lord who chose me above your father and above all his house to appoint me as prince over Israel, the people of the Lord. And I will celebrate before the Lord. I will make myself yet more contemptible than this, and I will be abased in your eyes. But by the female servants of whom you have spoken, by them I shall be held in honor. And it says that Michal did not have any children after that. Now, we don't know if the Lord made her barren or if her and David just didn't get together anymore after that. But she didn't have any children. And so I think what we need to understand is, you know, this self-importance thing of putting ourselves above other people, it doesn't have a place when it comes to God's people, when it comes to worshiping God. You know, I have been this way. I've tried to, ask the Lord for forgiveness. I've done that. But still my human nature is, by the way I grew up, is when somebody gets a little more excited than I do in worship service, sometimes, I'm well, what in the world? But, I don't have as big a problem with it as I used to. I've been at Promise Keepers meetings and, I youth events. I've seen it. And I don't have a problem with it, as long as it's like David, that his desire was to worship the Lord, and this is the way that he worshiped the Lord. If somebody lifts hands in our service, it doesn't bother me any. I'm okay with that. It's not something that, is offensive. And that's what we need to understand. Now, if somebody breaks up in a language in some gibberish and starts jumping over pews and stuff, then I got a problem with that. But, if it's just simple worship, I honestly wish that our bunch would get more excited about God. Because y'all do not see what I see every morning. It is like we are at a funeral a lot of times. Every Sunday morning, people are up there and we're singing praises and worship to the Lord, beautiful music. And they're just like... Now, the day before that, when the Razorbacks was playing, it was a whole different thing. And that's where we need to get to in our worship to the Lord. I'm not saying we got to get out and do a jig in the middle aisle, but we do need to be excited about God and about worshiping Him in a way that honors and glorifies Him. We can worship. I'm not a very outward showing type person. I never have been and probably never will be. But some people are more, they demonstrate that more than I do outwardly. But inwardly, I am worshiping the Lord, I am excited about worshiping the Lord. And so we need to remember not to be a Michael and be very critical of something that we may not understand, And so, again, I did not grow up in a charismatic type church. And I don't mean that about charismatic. Being charismatic carries a negative connotation because of when I was a kid, the charismatic movement was a big movement. But it doesn't have to be. We need to be charismatic about the Lord. It simply just means excited, and expressive of our worship to Him. It doesn't have to mean that, we're suddenly struck by the Holy Spirit and we fall out on the floor, we go nuts or anything like that. But it does mean that we recognize God for who He is, and we praise and worship Him in a way that is honoring and glorifying to Him. So, David gives us a great example of, yes, he was a human being, he made mistakes, right? Here in these 2 chapters, we see triumphs and we see, downfalls. We see troubles. Because he did not...
Great sermon title.
It would. It's a good series, wouldn't it? I'm going to have to write that down. But we all deal with those things. In some things we lift the name of the Lord on high, and sometimes we just blow it. And so that's something that we really need to work on because, David could not see his future, but God could. And David's future did not end well. Towards the end of his life, it didn't end well. It's not like Abraham who went and, dwelt among the fathers and, he lived a life and just went on, to be with the Lord in the life hereafter. David had a lot of heartache and heartbreak and troubles before he died, And a lot of it had to do with, that period of time when he first became king. And even though he honored God in many ways, but then there were periods, one of his problems in his life is he apparently really liked women. And there's nothing wrong with that. Certainly you want him to like women, but he took it to an extent that it never should have went. Because again, in Deuteronomy 17, God commanded you shouldn't take extra wives. One's enough.
Solomon took it even
And
farther.
Solomon, yeah, his son just kind of carried on that old family tradition, right?
Yeah.
So, hopefully we can learn from these things. That's one reason Scripture is written, and that's one thing. I mean, the writer of 1st and 2nd Samuel could have left out all the bad stuff and put in the good stuff, and we'd have never known about it. We'd have thought, hey, these dudes were superhuman beings. But again, these heroes of the Bible were simply human beings. And some of the things they did we just want to go, wow. I don't understand how they did that. But then other things you kind of going, I don't know what they were thinking. So next week we will be covering chapters 7 and 8. So that's what we're reading this week. So anyway, really good stuff, by the way. Chapter 7 and 8 are really, really good. And it again shows you, actually chapter 8 probably came before chapter 7. 2nd Samuel in particular is not in chronological order. So when you read chapter 7 and then you go to chapter 8 and you go, wait a minute. I thought it said that he was experiencing a time of peace. And here we are back at war with Moab and all those people. Well, it should have been reversed. Yeah. So it's just showing you how he got, Lord brought him to that point where he was able to experience peace. Anything else? Anything? Thank you all for joining us tonight. God bless you. Hope to see you in church on Sunday morning. If not, hope that you will join us live once again. God bless.